Well, Zakiya, it's great to be with you, and I'm so looking forward to our conversation. To start off for our audience, why don't I just let you first introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Zakiya Smith-Ellis. I'm Chief Policy Advisor to Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey, and previously I was his Secretary of Higher Education. Really excited for the conversation today. Scott?
Zakiya, thanks for that, and thank you for making the time to chat. I think we have a lot of things that are shared in our interests around how do we advance access to high quality education. So grateful for that. For the audience, I'm Scott Pulsipher. I'm the president of Western Governors University and have been so for just over 5 years now, and are excited about our mission to create pathways to opportunity. Zakiya, if I could. I'll kick it off to you. And one of the things I know that you've been closely associated with and directly involved with the work is the Value Commission in Post-Secondary Education that was particularly supported by the Gates Foundation, as well as the Institute for Higher Education Policy. And as I mentioned here at WGU, we're very committed to expanding access to high quality education with great outcomes, especially for those who've been historically underserved or marginalized. Maybe just to start, it would be great if you could share with me some of the key takeaways I suppose with me and our audience, like what are some of the key takeaways from that? What would you want those who read it to really take as action items out of it?
Well, thanks. And that work is just incredibly important for all of us who care about access, completion, and high quality completion of post-secondary credentials, thinking about what value students derive from those credentials is really important. And I feel like a lot of times in higher education, we kind of just say, oh, everybody knows, we know that you make $1 million more, et cetera. But that's like, I always tell people, it's on average, and we don't live our lives on average. So like on average, people in America have 2.5 kids. I don't know how you have 0.5 kids, right?
Yeah,
So
half a child.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So especially for the groups that WGU serves, and students that I care deeply about, and many of us and those folks who are watching this probably care a lot about the populations that haven't historically been able to access higher education, or when they do, sometimes don't complete. And sometimes when they do complete, unfortunately, they may not get as much leverage out of those credentials as other folks. How do we make sure that they do see that value that you would see on average, or even better than average? So that was the impetus for the work. And I think you'll see in the report that it tries to strike that balance of not just saying it's all kind of one metric, but there's a well-rounded way that you think about these from a variety of different angles. You do need to have a look at the populations that are served by post-secondary providers. We need to look at the, one of the things that we realize you can't get around is just what is the actual economic value for individuals. And I think sometimes that makes people uncomfortable. Happy to talk a little bit about that, but that's one of the things that you have to, if you're advising an individual who's kind of on the margins, that's something that they're definitely thinking about. The cost is another factor that always goes in, and that there are multifaceted ways to look at value, and there's no one singular measure.
Yeah. Can we actually maybe go a little bit deeper on that? Because I do believe at WGU, we have our mission around creating pathways to opportunity is underpinned by the promise of education as one of the surest path to opportunities, if not the greatest catalyst for people to change their lives. And we have actually focused on a key result for return for graduates, meaning that if the promise of education is supposed to be real, then you have to know that having attained the education, did it result in opportunity and the economic mobility with it? What are the downsides of using economic mobility measures or economic return measures? Because we really do like to focus on outcomes, on return on investment. Like, why shouldn't we? I mean, many in higher education aren't used to that kind of a conversation.
Yeah, I think it is interesting from almost the beginning time that I've been involved in higher education, from when I was just like a policy analyst. I've noticed I've been really interested in thinking about the ROI question, probably just because of, I don't know, my own upbringing. And when I was a kid, I was like really into colleges and wanted to kind of rank and figure out how do I, which one is any of the most. And so, you could go too far down that and try to make distinctions that are too granular. But on a broad scale, if you do care about individuals, I think you have to think about what is the value from an ROI perspective that they're going to that they can expect, and so the downside I think would be, you can't ever tell anyone with a guarantee that I can guarantee that you personally are never going to have any economic troubles because of this. I can guarantee that you are always going to have a job. What you can say is that your path is more likely to lead. Right now, if there's a recession, if you have a credential that's high quality, you are less likely to be laid off. You're more likely to be in a stable job. You're more likely to be able to have a family sustaining wage and salary. And it's not something that everybody knows. I think sometimes in the elite higher education circles, it's like, well, everybody knows the kinds of colleges that you should go to if you want this. So there's two problems with that. Is one, everybody doesn't know that. And then two, sometimes what we think intrinsically, oh yeah, if you go to this named place, you're definitely going to get more. And when you start to look at it and peel back that onion, that may not always be the case, and something that may be more affordable on the front end that doesn't cost as much. You could talk a lot about student loan debt, which people are frankly scared of. A lot of folks, and particularly communities of color, have a lot of anxiety about that. That when you do the cost benefit analysis, you want to make sure that the ROI really is there when you talk about the amount of investment. So the downsides, I guess, would be that you could be too granular and that you make people uncomfortable. I think you have to do things that make people uncomfortable sometimes to make progress. And the upside is, I think, tremendous if you do it well.
Yeah, that's interesting. You just think about that idea, is that you can lose the forest if you focus too much on the trees. Like that's the opposite kind of view of that old axiom, if you will, because you can overwhelm individuals with details. Is it the right program at the right institution? How do you finance it? What's the total cost of education? What kind of jobs can you expect? How much do they earn? It can be overwhelming. And if you focus too much on those details, you might lose that simple sense that, listen, education is a catalyst for you to be on a path to opportunity that will result in economic outcomes. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but it certainly has a much higher probability regardless of your background. Can I ask you one last question, and then maybe I could toss it to you to turn the tables, if you will, on me? And because I'm curious, from the report or from the work that you did on this Valley Commission, how much is higher education in a position to solve some of those root causes in the disparities in outcomes for individuals of color, from low-income backgrounds especially? How much is higher in a position to solve some of those root causes, or is K-12 also part of the problem? Are there broader issues that you would also have the listeners and audience be aware of and focus on?
That's a really great question, and I think embedded in how you described your personal philosophy about the way you come to this work, which is that education does have the potential. I share that, and the data bears it out that education has the potential. I think it's important to recognize, though, that there are other factors in society that are important, not just K-12 education or early childhood education. And I especially see this in my work now, doing broad range of policies with the state of New Jersey on behalf of the governor here. But the way communities are organized, the kinds of mental health services that are available, whether people can afford to pay their rent, whether they have health insurance, those kinds of things have enormous impacts on people's economic mobility and some of the basic needs. I think there's a lot of movement right now in higher education to realize something that I think K-12 realized maybe 20, 30 years ago, dare I say, that if you don't have your basic needs met, that it's hard to get that education. If you're hungry, if you, if you don't have healthcare and you need glasses, if you have a toothache, if you, have any number of challenges in terms of home stability. So those are things that we have to think about in as a society. How do we ensure that people have those things as well? And those are incredibly important. And that's actually something that we talked about. How do you parse out these things? The challenge is that you can't let solving for those things, which are incredibly important, stall us as a society from sharing access to higher education as another way for people to have that economic success and mobility.
Yeah. The one thing that resonates a lot with me and what you shared there is that is its connection to our cultural belief that we call one by one, which is simply this, is that we solve for the individual student and we advance outcomes one student at a time. That you can't really treat, we're serving 130,000 plus students right now. You can't treat them as just one aggregate mass that somehow is moving through our learning model. We actually have to focus on every single individual because the unique circumstances that they have, the approach they have to learning, their financial circumstance that they're in, even the other demands they have on their time. Do I have a family? Do I have a job, et cetera? All these are factors that can, if not dealt with, create barriers to their ability to complete. And so we try to solve for that on a one-by-one basis. So I love that. Maybe last thing, I've just, having some of the data from the commission's report, I think it highlights this. For those from low-income backgrounds, they have to finance what amounts to the equivalent of 157% of their family's annual income to pay for just 1 year. And if you compare that to those from high-income backgrounds, it only amounts to 14% of their family's income. So some of these barriers, like, how much does rent and making rent, how much does food on the table, how much do these other factors bear on the decision making and the ability of individuals to progress. So very useful to consider the whole individual. So thank you for that. Well, I've been peppering you with questions, so I'll let you maybe take us from here.
Well, yeah, I'm actually going to take that thread and ask about at WGU. How do you, you're known for being accessible, serving working adults. How do you think about the types of structures that you need to have in place, whether it's affordability, different types of modes of financing, different points of access, the online curriculum? Like, how do you think of it, just for those who may not be as familiar with the things that you do to try to ensure that people can have that barrier overcome?
Yeah, that's thank you for that question, because I do think that at the end of the day, we think of a working learner, someone who has so many other demands on their time and availability to focus on their education. Like, we're trying to solve for those, the flexibility that they need. And just simple examples I would share around that apply to why we're online, to why we have the instructional model we do. And then I'll give a little more focus on the affordability side of that. But consider a working learner who has a working schedule and then may also have family demands on top of that. When their educational model is only available at a certain time of day, at a certain location, in a certain classroom, you've just created a lot of barriers to individuals who probably need education more than so many who have it today. And so we thought about, how do you change the construct of time? Well, one of the easy ways to do that is delivered online. Another way to do that is change the notion of a lecture model and license and leverage third-party learning resources that they consume when they are available. How do you change the instructional model to be a one-on-one model? So rather than a lecture to a large audience online, it's now, how do I as an instructor engage with you individually to help you specifically learn the concepts and the outcomes that are necessary to demonstrate proficiency in that course? And so we're trying to change all ways by which we address an individual's needs and removing barriers as best we can. On the affordability one, and specifically, there's probably two dimensions to that that I'll hint at first. One is we just try to keep the costs really low. I think most may not know this, but in the last 40 years, the cost of education has gone up by, I think the number is 170% over the last 40 years. And next to healthcare, if not even worse than healthcare, I don't know if anything that's increased in cost at the same rate over that time period. And so we just think differently. And it's different because if you think in traditional higher education, the price of it is also given this perception that it must be higher quality. And that shouldn't be the case. Like, the quality matters more about, is the learning relevant to the job I want to pursue? Is it going to help me as an individual to be successful? Is it going to advance my progress in it? Versus what does it cost? The other reason we focus on affordability is it can increase the return on that investment when the investment level is really low. The last thing I'll maybe mention on this point is that, keeping the cost low is one side, but we certainly know even at our low cost that many students are still affordability is a question. And so how do we think about increasing access to, federal student aid, but in a way that is responsible? We are compelled by statistics. I know that was done, if I have my reference here right, by Beth Akers and Matt Chingos, who actually highlighted that 28% of students who actually had federal loans didn't know they had federal loans. And so we just tried to solve some of this information asymmetry. And so we started a responsible borrowing initiative over 7 years ago, where we just provided students better information about how much it costs to attend WGU. What are the aid options available to them, whether it's through Pell Grants, subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans, and encouraging them to only utilize that which they really need, such that over that 7-year time period, we've been able to reduce the borrowing per graduate by 34%, where 7 years ago, our debt per graduate was north of $20,000, where today it's about $14,000 or under $14,000. Meanwhile, we've also reduced the percentage of our students who even borrow or utilize aid to attend WGU because we've been able to keep the costs really low. And so those are certainly factors that we know affordability is one of the biggest barriers to helping individuals access the education they need and change their lives.
That's fantastic. And affordability is so huge. I started out my career doing college counseling for students in East Boston, and it was an eye-opening experience. I mean, I knew from my own experience with friends and things like that there's not enough good information out there. And the more you kind of peel back the onion and work with different populations, you see just how challenging it is. And so I just want to ask about affordability. What do you have any advice for other colleges? I mean, when you talk to your colleagues, they, whether it's traditional institutions that are serving many students in person, or other places that maybe community colleges or others that serve more working adults as well, that have broached some of the innovative ways to reach out to people but are not quite there. What advice would you have for others about that?
Yeah, the first one I would always say is start with your cost model. One simple thing that I would highlight is that now about 30% of total costs of operating an institution actually go to instruction. That seems a little backwards to me. When you're an institution of higher education, you should focus probably the largest portion of your budget on the instructional costs, because those are the ones that are going to increase the quality of learning, increase the ability of all individuals, regardless of their background, to progress and succeed. And how do you reduce those costs to become ancillary, if you will, to ultimately the key learning outcomes that you're trying to achieve? The second thing I would certainly say is, how do you increase the understanding of the aid and financing options that are available to them? Then that can include all the full gamut of federal aid options. Pell Grant certainly is a great option. Most institutions know that. But even advancing the doubling of Pell, I think there's some encouraging things that are happening to say we have to make some of these aid options more accessible to students, and the students themselves need to be aware of it. My own thinking is even the idea of free community college is very possible today for so many individuals that simply would qualify under Pell Grant programs. And if we expand those Pell Grant programs at the cost of community college programs or even public universities, it's already quite accessible, but that doesn't mean students know about it. It goes back to the point you made earlier, is they don't even know that they're supposed to go to a certain type of institution that may have this type of program that leads to these jobs. They also don't know that all these financing options are available to them, including free money from the federal government to pay for it. But the third thing I'd say that we're most excited about, that we think is going to change the thinking around not only financing degree programs, but also non-degree programs, is how do we think about income share agreements? How do we think about alternative financing options that are more aligned with outcomes, that also can be more equitable in their approach in terms of making sure that students are financing programs that lead to great economic return? That's one of the unique things around income share models, is that income has to be there for us individuals to start paying for the financing that they undertook. In a debt financing model, that doesn't presume any sort of income outcome. You're on the hook for the cost regardless. And so we think there are great ways by which you can dramatically improve the equitable access to all the diverse programs that exist within higher education, but also align student progress as well as institutional accountability, that when students undertake their education, that it also is going to result in economic opportunity and jobs. And when it does so, then the financing model of those, I think we see greater alignment in that opportunity.
No, I think those are some really interesting ideas, and a couple of pieces that I'll pull out. You're speaking my language when you say, students they don't know about some of the things. A lot of folks that are steeped in higher ed and have worked in the system for years say, oh, Pell is available. The community college is basically free. If you go to a community college and talk to students, unless they're going like for free, and even those that are probably didn't realize it at the beginning. And the thing I would say when I was working on those programs, that we have a free community college program in New Jersey, is, I was regularly had folks say, oh, well, it's already free. And it's like, well, why hide that fact? If it's already free, like you should just tell people that so that they could go. We had an income cutoff, and people would say, well, if you're making less than that much money, it's already free with all the grant aid. And it's like, well, then all we need is like an advertising campaign, which is much less than, what people think of when they think of the investment that you would have to make it free, because a lot of people just don't know. So there's a lot of power to making the message a lot more tangible for individuals about what the benefits are.
Can I interject here on this point? Because I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on this point. Is like much of what has occurred during the pandemic, it certainly has shown that higher education struggled a little bit, especially for a population of individuals in our nation as a whole, and even then differently across states and communities, is that many who need education in particular are now even further from it because they've had income loss or job loss, or they have greater dependency in supporting children that haven't been in school, whatever it may be. But certainly many signs have kind of emerged that much of what higher ed was designed to provide and who it's designed for is not a great fit for the great breadth of individuals who need it today. So I'm curious as to what have you seen, or what would you recommend at a state level or at an institutional level that we should be doing or thinking about in terms of increasing understanding, awareness of the availability of federal funds, or for that matter, how that funding is used, meaning should it be used for reinvention, expanding online models, expanding non-degree credential offerings? Like, what are some of the ways in which you think this already large amount of education-related funding that's available, how should states and institutions be thinking about that?
That is the question of the day within the new federal funding. So a couple of thoughts. One is that, there's this money that is available. It's a lot of money, but a lot of people, a lot of colleges had a lot of revenue loss. So I know folks are just using it to like get back to where they were to get back on track. And that's, certainly needed in some places. But what I would also hope, and what we're talking about in the K-12 sector as well as higher ed, is how can you use this as a catalytic investment to, transform certain areas. So if you've always been, I think one area is the online offerings, right? If you never had kind of the capital dollars, and I don't mean, infrastructure capital, but like the technology infrastructure, and say, can we offer, robust, high quality, because the quality of, as you know well, if you're going to try to do some of the things online, you need to have high quality, otherwise it won't work well. And that does take some initial investment and take some training of your faculty and staff to be able to support that new model. But if there was ever a time to see, people who, can't to figure out how to make that work, it has been now. So I know that a number of folks have gone down that path, but I think we can go even further in connecting education with educational institutions with businesses to do more, whether it's like on the job learning, but I'm trying to think of the right word. Apprenticeship sounds very formal, but that's something that we in New Jersey have been really pushing degree apprenticeships, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be internships. It can be other, I guess the best term would be work-based learning experiences, so that people don't have to make that trade-off to say, I am, at work, I'm in school. There's ways that you can merge those things through collaborative partnerships. And that's really beneficial to the individual, but it's also educationally. If you can see how to apply your learning in real time in a setting, what we know from all the research is that you're more likely to retain that information.
Yeah, that last point is, I think, really, really important. It's one that I think also supports the whole skills denominated future of education and work, because when individuals can actually directly see the knowledge, skill, and ability they're gaining as they're progressing through their education, and how that skill will increase the opportunities that they have out there, these jobs at this income level, et cetera. Like, I'm now seeing the value of the learning while I'm in it, rather than having to wait till I get to the end of the program, whether that's 1 year, 2 year, or 4 years. Like, that's a really long journey to only discover at the end of it whether I got any value out of it. If I'm seeing it while I'm going along, you can dramatically increase the likelihood that they persist, because they now see how that can generate an opportunity and a return for them economically. The other thing about a skills denominated future is that increasingly hiring managers and employers, including governments at a federal and state level, they're using skills-based hiring, because they know that the pathway for their talented employees is not only through higher education degree pathways. Yeah. They know that, like you mentioned, experience-based learning or work-based learning, if you can use a skills denominated model, it can now also translate work into skills. And so it's not just an academic one, it's also a work-based one, whether that's through apprenticeship or other things, that it now kind of creates the fuller picture of what an individual's acquired through education or academic or work-based in terms of knowledge, capability, learning outcomes that they have and how they apply to jobs. That's one thing I would maybe just come back to is your point is, I was connecting two dots in different surveys I've seen early on. The surveys were awesome about, when I say awesome, they were comical in the sense that, were we surprised that students hated the online learning experience that they got? You're like, this is rubbish. Well, yeah, it was, because it was mostly rubbish. Like, we kind of took a classroom design and tried to just, put it online. Yeah. And it wasn't very good yet, but I'm connecting that to more recent surveys where it's showing the same students are not expecting a fully in-person, in-classroom experience going forward. So they know technology is part of their learning from this point forward. And so institutions certainly need to consider how do they invest in improving their use of technology, making it more personalized, making it more immersive in an online experience. And that's going to be a key part of, I think, how state and federal funds can actually help institutions continue to reinvent themselves for the future.
Quality is a factor no matter whether you're in person or online. And the quality of the learning experience doesn't just have to do with, a lot of it has to do with the faculty and, their expertise, but a lot of it has to do also with the environment, the learning environment, and how you structure it. And the best faculty members are able to create that in-person learning environment where it's engaging, and the best online models are able to do that as well. And I love some of these things. When I say I love it, I don't really love it. But when people critique something that's so expansive in terms of what good and bad looks like, it's like, the number of what online can be has such a wide range of, what quality it looks like or how it can look, that it's difficult to say, online is bad or, online is good. It's how it is delivered, which is what that matters.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think the same is true around technology. It's not whether online or in person is one is better than the other. The question for us really, and I think for everyone, should be this, which is, how does technology enable you to personalize the learning to expand student success and outcomes, or improve student success and outcomes? Because technology is going to be a reality of today and tomorrow. And so every institution, including every faculty member, they should be thinking about, how does it improve their ability to increase the quality of the learning, personalize it so you can expand equity within it, meaning that you can start addressing some of the disparities that exist in progress and completion rates, at the same time in the quality of the learning design, so that even the learning itself maps to opportunities that exist for the future. So, I've really, really enjoyed our conversation. I maybe just toss it to you. If there are any final comments that you'd like to offer to tie this all up together for our audience or for ourselves, to say, as we consider the disparity and the equity concerns exist within higher education today, that the report has certainly highlighted, how we think about affordability, technology, invention. Like, how would you maybe sum all this up for our audience?
Well, there's so much that we're on the precipice of kind of thinking through when it comes to higher education. The pandemic has certainly laid bare a lot of the inequities that were there before, and some work that we have to do in society and in education. But I think if we keep the equity at the forefront of how we think about solutions every single time, if you think about who is that working learner who may not have all of the preparatory experience to know, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. How do you, if you keep that person in the forefront of your mind in your planning and decision making, because that's what we need to expand in order to move forward, is to have more of those individuals come through our educational, whether it's higher ed, traditional, or other kind of pipelines, is that's really important. So thinking about that from a user design experience is what I think I would love for people to, that's the thread that I feel like connects all of what we talked about today. What about you? What do you think?
Well, I was going to say, is like, you could just, tee that up perfectly for WGU, because if there's any one thing that we would say that truly distinguishes WGU, it's that we put the student at the center of everything that we do. And that's how we approach the design of curriculum and the learning outcomes, the design of the learning experience, the design of the delivery and the modality of how we deliver it, the affordability considerations. Like, at the end of the day, for education to be relevant, it has to work for the individual. And that's true for all individuals, not just the privileged backgrounds, those that come from privileged background. And so for education to be that catalyst for people to change their lives, it has to work for everyone. And to do that, I think that design approach that you mentioned, like putting the student, the individual at the center of the design, and starting from there, we'll end up with some awesome innovations that will change our future. So I'm looking forward to being on that journey.
Awesome. Me too.
Well, thanks so much, Zakiya. I think that's all the time we have, and it's been wonderful chatting with you.
Thank you, Scott.